We join you at this hour with major breaking news out of Washington. In just the last hour, the Supreme Court ruled President Trump does not have the authority to impose most of his sweeping global trade tariffs. Despite a conservative majority on this court, this was a 6-3 decision, with 3 conservative justices siding with the 3 liberal justices. The ruling is seen as a major blow to the president's efforts to try and reshape the global economy. It now raises several questions about what happens next for businesses, for consumers, the scope of the president's power, and the future of his economic agenda. Our team is in place with reaction from all across the spectrum. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris and ask her kind of what Christine alluded to here, the mess. That's not a legal term, but that is an issue that was brought up by the minority in writing against this decision, right?
Absolutely. It was brought up that logistically, the court is giving no guidance on what happens from here. So the decision is that the president cannot impose tariffs under IEEPA, but there isn't any limitation, parameters. It doesn't say that there is some kind of analysis about the duration or the scope or something that would give some insight or clarity on what happens next. It does not say that this does not go retroactively. It's only moving forward. It simply says that these tariffs cannot be imposed under this particular law. So that means a lot of uncertainty. That means kicking this back to the Court of International Trade, where, as Christine said, businesses have already filed lawsuits seeking to preserve their right to recoup tariffs that have already been spent. But what does that mean from a practical perspective? And, Joe, this was something that was brought up in oral arguments by the Trump administration about the public policy aspect of this, which is reflected in Justice Kavanaugh's dissent. What happens if this is, in fact, overturned? The logistics are simply not addressed by the Supreme Court.
And Misty said the word there, IEEPA. She was not sneezing. That stands for International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That is at the heart of this decision. And Misty, it's noteworthy. It was the Chief Justice John Roberts who wrote the majority opinion here, taking on that act head on. What is it he had to say, and what does it say that he's the one who wrote this opinion?
Well, this is an opinion of incredible consequence, which is why you see Roberts being the one to pen it. But something that you bring up, the sneeze of IEEPA, one of those letters stands for emergency. And something that's interesting in this decision that was also noted at the oral arguments is that the court does not really get into that aspect about whether or not there is an emergency situation. This decision is largely based on the text of the statute, which does not mention the words tariffs at all. So the critical issue and what is the crux of this decision is something called the Major Questions Doctrine, which says that if Congress wanted to give the executive authority to take an action in these issues of incredible consequence, it would be explicit in the statute. And so imposing, and this is the way the decision kicks off, if the executive being able to impose tariffs unlimited in duration and scope is simply not written into the law. So it's a very textualist opinion, doesn't really get into whether or not there is or is not an emergency, simply says the law does not allow for tariffs to be imposed by the executive under this particular statute because Congress did not give the executive that authority. So it's pretty clear cut. It didn't parse it out. They could have said some things are okay. There's a limit of time or scope. They didn't do that. They just said that the president could not impose tariffs using this IEEPA as its legal authority.
And Misty, as we've noted, the court has sided with the president on a lot of smaller issues over the past year. Here we see a departure. Do you feel, reading this, is the court trying to send a message to the president, keeping in mind there are some other major, bigger decisions still to come this year?
So I think this is absolutely a point that needs to be made. Of course, this decision is of incredible consequence when it comes to the economic policy of the president, when it comes to the impact on these companies, the impact on other countries, the impact on trade. But there's another huge issue here, and it is the president's attempts through the Supreme Court to expand executive authority. And here you see the court saying that it's too far in this particular circumstance, that the the president does not have this unfettered authority to impose tariffs, that Congress has a role in that. So it's all about the separation of powers. And Joe, that is a common theme throughout many of the cases that we are waiting for from the Supreme Court, that expansion of executive authority. Here, the court saying the president went too far.